Welcome to the Business of Platforms, a video podcast series where Vivaldi will be chatting with the world's leading marketers, thinkers, and innovators about the evolution of business and the exciting ways in which platforms are helping companies and brands deliver greater value. Hello and welcome to the Business of Platforms podcast. My name is Agathe Blanchon-Ehrsam and I'm a partner and the Chief Marketing Officer of Vivaldi. And I'm thrilled to be here today with Jaime Punishill.
Thank you so much.
The CMO of Lionbridge.
Yes.
So Lionbridge is one of those companies that everybody uses every day or gets touched by every day, but people may not know what Lionbridge is.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about the company, the business that you're in, and the clients that you have?
Yeah, no, it's really fascinating. And as you know, I'm not from the industry, so this has all been new to me to learn. And you realize our paw prints literally are on almost everything people do every day without even knowing it. Lionbridge is one of the world's largest language and linguistic services providers. So we really do four things for companies. We collect and test data for algorithms. So if you talk to a device, as a good example, right? Your phone, your car, some device in your house, in order for that device to work, it has to have lots of data to train that algorithm, and with lots of language snippets and dialects and different languages, and somebody needs to collect all that data, and we do it, and we then test the results. Did it perform right? Did it answer right? Et cetera, et cetera. So a big data collection and testing business for algorithms. We help create a lot of content, whether that's original copywriting or proofreading or transcreating a campaign. So maybe you're going to advertise something in America and you want to advertise it in France. How does that campaign work in the different cultures? We transform data. Typically translation, which is how the industry started. It's how Lionbridge started. We were one of the very early companies in translation. And then that moved into what's called localization, which is just taking a product and making sure it works in another market. Again, culturally appropriate or linguistically appropriate. And then we have a big testing business. And you heard how we test sort of algorithms, but when you make software for an English-speaking country and then you need to make it for a non-English-speaking country, who tests that software or that phone? So there really is the four things: the sort of the data collection and training, the transformation, and the testing.
So really enabling global commerce as we know it today.
That's really what it is.
Across a lot of different verticals.
Any vertical you can think of, 358 languages, virtually any market. Anytime you've got a product that starts in one language and one country and needs to cross a cultural barrier, a language barrier, or a national barrier, we're a huge global enabler.
So you're present in how many countries then?
We have offices in 57 markets, but we actually have 500,000 folks who in some way, shape, or form are doing gig work really on behalf of these products and services, because you have to find very specialized talent.
So you're working in pharma, you're working in gaming, a lot of very specialized translators. Is that what you would call the community that you have?
There are translators, there are interpreters, there are linguists, there are testers, there are annotators. So think about if you want to train an image recognition system. Somebody has to say, yes, that's a human, and that's a human, has brown hair, and sometimes you have to do that in different languages. So you need different kind of skill sets.
So it's interesting because you talked about that community as people who are engaging in the gig economy.
Yeah.
One of the ways in which we talk about kind of people engaging in the platform economy. And it sounds like Lionbridge is a little bit of a platform in that you bring in different people to play different roles in the kind of activity of translating and localizing content. And yet, what I find really interesting is that's something that you were doing and that the company has been doing all along. It feels like there's been kind of a switch in the way in which you think about the activity of the company. our CEO likes to say that any business that can be a platform will become a platform. In this case, it feels like you always were a platform, but somehow you've recast the way in which you think about the business and the activity that you're in to adopt some of the platform dynamics that could lead to network effects and some of the benefits of being a platform. Can you talk a little bit about how that happened, how you came to that realization that by thinking of yourself as a platform, you could unlock some opportunities?
Yeah, well, and as you know, we're very early in this journey. You know, we have a company was taken private about 18 months ago or so, new CEO, new management team, and so we've really sort of been digging into the business to try to understand the dynamics of the business and the potential for it. And along the way, we looked at both how we had thought about ourselves and how we typically had structured projects and work for customers, and it very much was this sort of, you know, set of inputs, bunch of stuff happens, set of outputs, factory, supply chain, however you want to think about it. But without really much consideration for exactly what that factory looked like, even though over time you can see very much that the factory had changed how it was taking inputs and producing the outputs. And our industry, I think like lots of industries, has ebbed and flowed over time, where it went more freelance or gig and then more proprietary and as the work has shifted. But by and large now,
I like the way you're looking at it from a really kind of value chain perspective, right? So all of the different elements of your activity that line up in order to create value. By thinking of it as a platform and not so much as a pipeline or a stovepipe, as you say, where does value get created and for whom?
Well, now this is a really interesting question on a couple of levels, and like I said, we're still pretty early in thinking about it. Traditionally, it was, you know, one client had one project with one purpose. The inputs came in, we did whatever our specialty was, and out it went. If you look at the aggregate behavior, though, of that, you ask yourself all kinds of interesting questions. So I'll give you a good example. We have 46 billion words sitting in our warehouse, our translation warehouse. We can tell you over time, actually, how global commerce has shifted. So a great example, I just pulled some data on what was happening with Chinese language translation. So if you look at the top 5 languages from 2017 to 2018, for simplified Chinese, you can see a shift from going into European languages primarily in the top 5 to no European languages being in the top 5, and lots of other Asian languages, Vietnamese, Thai in the top 5.
Almost a leading indicator of how commerce is going then.
You definitely are seeing how the early global players are shifting where they think their next wave of business is coming from. And that's just one, if you looked at one company, you could see that. But now we can actually see how many, many companies are thinking about their next markets. Because to get into a market, you've got to figure out the language and the product offer, et cetera, in order to penetrate. In some markets like India, that's particularly complicated. There's 122 official languages in India, 17 printed on the currency, and Netflix just launched first original series in 24 languages there. If you want to do business in India, Netflix has just set the bar up here. You've got to figure out how to communicate to 1 billion plus Indians in 24 languages.
Very interesting.
Yeah.
So, kind of talking about setting the bar very high, how does the kind of thinking of yourself as a platform changed how you think about the different stakeholders of your business and the ecosystem within which you operate? And how has this changed how you think about how you're setting the bar with each of these stakeholders?
Yeah, that second one's a little harder than the first one. So let's start with the first one. And you know, I think industry-wide, as the large players like us have developed, there's this interesting tension set between the role that we play and the role of the gig players, right? And you just take translators. The translators are adding tremendous value. They are the ones who understand the subject matter, both language and potentially topic. So you mentioned pharma. If I want to help a pharmaceutical manufacturer move into a new market, I have to find somebody, for the story I always give, I've got to find somebody who speaks English and Catalan and understands...
And pharma.
pharma,
Yeah.
right? So I can find all 5 of those
even
people.
a discipline within pharma.
Absolutely, right? And so we're really good at sort of finding that special talent and harnessing it in the right way. So who's adding value there? Well, there's lots of different ways value are being added there, but there's sometimes been tension in the system. And I think one of the key insights that our CEO had very early on is we hadn't been appreciating and engendering enough support with our community, recognizing how much value they were adding into the system. And by sort of recognizing the way the supply chain was laid out, it caused us to shift and say, you know what, we have to totally engage with the workers inside of the system very differently and find a way to help them be even more successful, get even more work so that they can contribute even better into the system, which of course then benefits us and by extension benefits our customers. So everybody really wins by understanding the extension of the supply chain.
So in a sense, recasting your ecosystem no longer as like a customer and all these partners in contributing value to the customer, but truly having kind of privileged relationships with all these different participants in the ecosystem and having to treat them as you would your customers, and changing the ways of working with all these different participants.
In this case, everybody's both a customer and a producer and a partner inside of the ecosystem because everybody needs everybody else in order to work. Right? The supply chain's quite different.
Sounds like a lot of things to think about in terms of making it work.
Yeah.
Can you maybe just in general talk a little bit about the benefits that you see, kind of as you've shifted, the benefits you see of being really run as a platform?
Yeah, and again, I think we're so early in the journey. I think it's hard for us, specifically for me, around Lionbridge to say exactly what the benefits are
And so
with tangible examples. But again,
more
things that we can think about. Because we have this huge corpus of data, there's all kinds of insights inside of that corpus of data that could be harnessed on behalf of other projects, other players, other potential buyers that we've just never even considered. Because it was you placed an order, we put something through the factory and moved on and never really thought about is there exhaust or information or insight or a secondary use for that work.
Potentially getting into another business if that was any examples that you can provide of companies who've done that, who by shifting to that type of thinking have entered a adjacent space? Or
I think the greatest example of the platform model is really Salesforce, right? If we all recall, started with the no software buttons, right? Because what were they? They were the original cloud company, right?
To deposition everyone else.
That's right, and what they discovered, of course, was once you got people into the system, the core value, while it was CRM or customer data management, you actually had built the nervous system of a company because you had all the information on the customers flowing through, and everybody needed access to that information for all other value creation.
Yeah. So it's interesting because kind of your analogy to the raw ingredient of soy creates the parallel of data now being that raw ingredient that you're using and figuring out how to repackage and to create value off of it. In a business that wouldn't necessarily be a Salesforce, who kind of interestingly shifted from the software business to more of a subscription business thanks to the cloud, and how could you help another business that wouldn't be in software think about how to use data in that perspective, that kind of extra utility that data offers? Kind of what are some of the tips that you would share?
Well, boy, that's a hard one. I guess I'll start here. I've spent most of my career in financial services, and watching what has really been a systemic long-term transformation of that business. Alongside, but really I've spent most of my time in digital transformation, so I've seen lots of businesses. I think many companies they confuse what their underlying raw value is and what they actually bring, which then makes getting to what you're asking about much, much harder, right? So the story I always tell is there used to be clipper ships that would leave Boston Harbor or anywhere on the harbor, and they would sail up to Canada, Newfoundland, and Nova Scotia, and they would throw ropes out with big hooks on, in the spring to bring back chunks of ice that had broken up when the thaw had happened, and they would drag them back, and then they would sell the chunks of ice. And the question I always ask people when I tell a story is, what business was that? Were those folks in? And more often than not, people say, well, they were in the ice hauling or in the shipping business. Actually, they were in the cooling business. And if you recognize that, you react very differently to the advent of refrigeration. But I think you, just by reframing that and understanding what is the core value, you can then ask, what are other possible values of this business where I can reuse it or repurpose it? Simple example, there are companies now that take satellite images of parking lots and look at the traffic and the car presence in those parking lots to judge whether or not there's good retail sales. I don't think anybody at Walmart or Target or any other store ever thought of their parking lot as having value, much less that it would give competitive insight to somebody else. But that parking lot actually has inherent value to someone if you spend time thinking about it.
It's really about reframing and thinking of that frame of reference, as you say, which is interesting because as you've been thinking about recasting Lionbridge and understanding how to create value, it's also led to a rebranding exercise. So helping frame for people what Lionbridge is about. Can you talk a little bit about kind of the necessity as you shift business models, the necessity to rebrand, and how that has been important to you as you kind of, as CMO, try to share the message with your stakeholders?
Yeah, so it's interesting because, and you alluded to it earlier, Lionbridge had changed and grown and adapted tremendously over the last 22 years before any of us arrived. And all four of those businesses or capabilities that I highlighted had all evolved over time, really built off that core idea of, can we just help people translate? And you could see how you just kept building the next building blocks. But if you ask most people if they've heard of Lionbridge or what Lionbridge does, if they've heard of us, they still think of us as that traditional translation or localization company, which was really the imperative of the rebranding, which is, wow, we do all these other things. All these things were very natural and adjacent and adding value. And I'll come back to another dimension in just a second, but nobody really knows it. And so the more we started thinking about that and looking at the value of what it would take to help reframe it, and then we started again, okay, so what is our core value and how do we work? It became very clear, wow, we have this incredibly very different thing. We've got this platform, we've got all these workers, we've got all these touch points. We are helping connect sometimes even people within a company in different divisions or on different projects with each other, much less with the workers or the experts or the data sets or the other things that they need. And it really is all these systems of connections and nodes. And we needed a way to both honor our past, our history of translation and localization, which is where the name comes from. Lion is actually a reframe of L10N, which is the shorthand for the word localization, right? It was localization, cool. Your bridge to the globe. So how do we honor that and also suggest that there's a much bigger story?
Sure, it definitely paints a picture of potential.
Yeah. And then it also helps reframe. If you look at what we do, we have all these sub-capabilities. But the next twist of this is, you know what our real strength is if you look at us not in any one vertical for any one capability, and instead you look at us as a globalization platform for your company, and you work with us for more than one piece, there's no loss, there's no data loss, there's no friction as you go from listening to the universe in multiple languages, to translating that into strategy in multiple languages, to creating creative or content, to communicating, to developing a product, to interacting. The more you work with us, the more value you actually get.
Which is a very different narrative than the original one.
Yeah.
So this is not your first rebranding.
It's not.
You were critical to this very successful rebranding of TIAA.
Yes.
Can you share a little bit how rebranding a perhaps more traditional firm versus a platform business, how's that different in terms of both kind of the approach that you take to being able to kind of think about the new brand, but then also the actual launch?
Yeah, well, and they were very different for very different reasons. In some ways, they were similar. TIA was another company, had been around forever. They invented the variable annuity. Nobody even knows it. And then they had expanded into many other business areas that people didn't know. So it was the same kind of dimensionality. We're much bigger. We have lots of different stuff. We want to both honor the new and give you a sense of this much greater purpose and greater product set. But there wasn't really a platform dynamic. It was more of a one-stop shop, and there's lots of different things that we can do dynamic. So the whole strategy was quite different in how we thought about the communication, and then how we thought about that would come to life in the in the experience or the advertising or the messaging that we were creating. Lionbridge's opportunity was so different because the more we can get people to understand that it's a platform and reframe it, the more I can actually demonstrate actual platform dynamics and connections. Simple example, we can, if you think about what we do in training all those chatbots or all those voice algorithms, we're training the universe to think about and communicate with devices differently. The very experience then we would deliver to you as you want to interact with us should be reflective of that. Sure. You could actually see how hard it is or how easy it can be with sort of proper connection of that voice search, and then where all the data goes, right, on the other end. So I think we think about it a little bit different because it wasn't just a reframing of the company and putting a new look and a feel that was more modern and innovative. This was really telling a very different story about who we were.
So any watch outs for people who are in the process of rebranding, in particular rebranding as a platform?
Boy, that's interesting. I think the question is, does rebranding as a platform, I'll think about that for a second.
Sure.
If I were thinking about rebranding as a platform, I think it's not so much watch outs as things I think you have to do. In the platform dynamic, it isn't just the buyer and the seller, right? You're now thinking about a multiplicity of nodes, and there's two-way. Most folks won't think about you that way, and there are new players in there who aren't thinking about you at all. So you have a very different kind of rebrand because you both have to change the perception of the different parts of your supply chain. In our case, how do our existing customers and buyers think about us? How might in our case, the workers think about us? What kind of tools and information might we have to give them that's different? And then we also have entirely new buyers who can extract value from the platform that they didn't even know existed. Yeah. And so I don't just have a awareness or a brand attribute or a perception change. I've got an entirely new category to create for entirely new buyers. And I think that's the thing that we're struggling is the probably too strong, but it's this net new work of all these new buyers who didn't even know that there was a story to be told or there was data to be had in order to do what they're trying to do.
So kind of multiplication, potentially more complexity in terms of both creating messages, putting them out there, and then measuring your success, right? So you almost need to think of it as independent yet very linked, because you can't be dissonant across all these different stakeholders. So how does that change the role of the CMO then?
Well, I mean, I think the CMO role is going through such fascinating change, generally independent of the platform, right? The percentage of my budget that is in technology versus 5 years ago or 10 years ago is staggering, right? And
can you dig deep a little bit into what kind of technology you're looking at?
I mean, you've got the tech stack is such a huge change. The buyer behavior is going such radically changing as more you see B2B buying behavior now mimic B2C buying behavior. And then you add this platform. You get the digitization story, which is causing everybody lots of agita. Is that a tech story? Is it a CDO story? Is it a CMO story.
Sure.
And then more and more CMOs are picking up the experience. And experience is now one of the big things I think that we have noticed that will be important for us is instead of translating the documentation for a product that you buy and sell, the translation or the work we do is on the product itself. The voice search is the product. The input and the output is the product now. That's a radical shift for the company, but then it puts me in a very different position as I think about corporate strategy or product development or what the experience means. And so I think there are 4 or 5 just huge changes that are hitting the CMO all at the same time.
And then taking everything you said all the way to sales, right? Because it used to be that the head of sales was king, who was marketing in the background in the B2B world. Suddenly all of this, in particular, everything you've mentioned about tech, allows the marketer to have access to all this data and understand the path to the customer and to not only just the customer, but the most valuable customer. So you end up being able to play a role all the way down to sales.
That's right. And this is, you think about that, there's a challenge between the CMO and the CTO over this new tech stack. And there's an equal challenge and or opportunity between the CMO and the CSO or the CRO in how they think about go-to-market as a complete unit. Because it isn't so distinct. It isn't just marketing does this prep work and then sale, goes and takes it home. It's not so simple anymore, right?
So if you had to think about the future of marketing for B2B, are there any kind of big trends that you see being relevant in the next few years?
Boy, I don't know if I would extrapolate these to overall big trends. I'll tell you the things that I'm spending a lot of time thinking about, right? And I think it's, in some ways it can be unique to us. It is clear that the experiential universe is here in spades. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how can we even create a marketing experience or a sales experience that reflects the very value that we're delivering, we're asking you to sign up with us for, to deliver.
How do you think about corporate brand versus product brand? And how do you make the difference in terms of how you're going to be building out the corporate brand moving forward versus helping support the product value propositions?
Boy, I don't know how you don't think about them as part and parcel of the same thing, right? I think if you buy my logic, and again, because I'm not selling something you touch necessarily, but something you use, and it is experiential. The corporate brand is experiencing the value of the product, right? And we do lots of stuff, but we're always in effect helping somebody create an experience on the other end for themselves. So in that regard, the brand has to be a reflection of the product brand. I just think it's all part. I don't even know how to separate. I'm not thinking about them in any kind of separate way. Maybe that's the easiest way of answering the question. If you can experience it, I don't even have to market it. I don't have to sell it. You feel it. You know it right away. And you see this. You can see this in the way, so many of the services now. You try it. You can just try it. You try it. You experience it. It becomes so much easier to take a little code snippet or drop some product, some data into something and get it back out, as opposed to having to sell you on the value that you might get when you sign up and you deploy and you go through the huge integration. And I guess there's the other really big thing for B2B is so much is moving to the cloud, and so many of those services that used to have to be on-prem are now out there and available. It's so much easier to test and learn and experience stuff right away. It should shorten sales cycles because they just become all experiential. No different than on your phone. You can now try any app. It's $1.99.
Yep.
Why wouldn't you just try everything?
Yep. So
interesting new business model. Just throw stuff out there that's worth a trial.
If you had to give one word of advice to kind of young marketers who are coming out of school and who aspire to a position of a CMO or to be part of the transformation of business, what would that be?
Don't aspire to be the CMO, and what I mean by that is, I never thought about being a CMO. I didn't think about the problem set that way. I got very early on into the digital transformation universe, which was really about business transformation. Let's just be honest. where lots of people are realizing that now. Less people talked about that in the mid-90s. But to me, change was coming. Digital technology was just the place. So that's where I hopped in. And the way I've managed my career was just chasing what looked like another interesting vein of change. And at some point that led me into marketing, because it was so clear that the CMO or the marketing role was changing. And if you looked at my resume, it's as if I had CMO in today's day and age in mind, because I built the building blocks that look like they belong there. I couldn't have told you those were the building blocks.
Yep.
And I don't think you can. I don't know what the world's going to look like in 24 months, much less in 60 months, right? Pace of change is so great. The degree of change is so great. I don't think you can tell how things are exactly going to turn out. So I guess my piece of advice is learn and adapt and pivot and chase interesting things. It'll end up right.
Sounds like it was a good rule of life for you.
Yes, it worked for me.
Thank you so much for sharing all of these thoughts and insights into Lionbridge and to the future of marketing.
Great, thank you so much. Great to be here.